Standing up in McKinney. This is According to Callus. Coming to you on the 12th of September, the year of our Lord 2024. Thank you, Mr. Hagman. It is episode 690, and we're going to dust off the old title, Theology Thursday. Now, I feel compelled to do this episode because some of this has come home to roost in my own life. And I'm going to do everything I can to avoid making this about personalities or naming names or being gratuitously rude. This is a rant or event, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to tell you this up front. And you may agree, you may disagree. And I want to reserve the right that there could be something out there that I am unaware of that conclusively proves my position wrong, though I'm willing to bet that there's not. Okay, before we get there, before we get started, let me remind you, the only thing I ask from you, my dear listeners, is to like, share, and subscribe to this here podcast. Now, if you're feeling particularly motivated, you could rate or review this podcast. You can follow me on the social media of your choice. I have a page and group on Facebook. I am a pro at Gab, and I still drop in at MeWe. And I guess you can still find most of my program uploaded over at YouTube. Now, at some point in the future, once we start implementing some of the changes that are going to have to happen, it's inevitable, we'll look at getting over to Rumble, Brighteon, Odyssey, that kind of stuff. But for right now, we're just going to keep it straight up where we're at. Going to do my level best to get out, the 3 episodes a week. Trying to stay consistent in delivery. That, however, has been a challenge. So I think at this time, we're going to rehash some things that I've talked about in the past, right? There's plenty of other episodes where I've covered some of this stuff, so I won't belabor it, but I feel like I need to recap it so that it makes sense. So you can kind of see where I'm coming from. All right? I grew up in a very, we'll call it legalistic, in my opinion, very legalistic. Your mileage may vary, right? Legalistic by an objective measure. How legalistic, we'll just leave that one alone. From there, I transferred to what I would call a more seeker-sensitive, more kind of standard evangelical church that came out of a Baptist church. So, and that was solid, very good. We had a very good preacher. Everything was good there. Then we moved on down to Texas, and I tried to follow that same vein when I got down here. They had an excellent men's group at the first church I was part of. And, I was sad to part ways, but, you do what you do for your kids. And we ended up at another church. And everything, seemed normal, went well. And I've always been, what I would say, a fan of a challenge, right? If you've got a preconceived notion or you think you understand something, I think it's good to be challenged. I think you should be able to question, why do I believe what I believe? And you should also be able to understand that maybe there's something else more going on there, or something deeper, something richer, right? Kind of the whole purpose of why they have Bible studies and all this thing, right? So that being said, in this time period, I went from a rebellious, snot-nosed kid, because I didn't care for the legalism. I went into what I would call a more benign evangelical church, and I kind of figured things out, became my own person, transitioned onto adulthood when I moved down to Texas, got some more of that, got kind of brought up in some things, became more mature in what do I believe, and then joined, another church. So this has been the space of, 52 years, almost 53, but 52 years of, my churches. I've been in essentially 4. And they've all been relatively very consistent when it comes to a couple of key things. i.e., sexual sin, is all sin. We don't pretend it's otherwise. Yes, you can be forgiven, but no, you don't get to practice in that. Now, some of this is hidden, right? You don't know if somebody's taking part in adultery or fornication. You don't know these things. You don't know if people are addicted to pornography. But honestly, most of those people have some shame and hide it. They know it's sinful behavior, and they try and control it sometimes on their own. Sometimes they get help. But they know that it's wrong, and they try and sort their way through it. And nobody's perfect in this regard. The sexual sin is very wide. So that being said, it was always understood. And then the other thing was, there are specific prescriptions of who serves in a church and what they do, i.e. elders and the senior pastor, or the pastor on Sunday is a man. It's as simple as that. There are other functions and things that women do. We don't hate women. We don't think less of women. That these are just roles that were assigned by God. It's pretty straightforward, pretty clear. Fast forward to, I don't know, at this point, I would guess 7 or 8 years ago, one of my former churches decided that they have reinterpreted or reevaluated the situation and decided, well, no, there's really no reason to not have women as elders. Now, I guess maybe there's an argument to be had there. I'll just say on the onset, I would be open to having that discussion. I'm predisposed to have an answer ahead of time, just like anybody else would be, but I would at least hear it out. And all I can think about is the idea that, I think it's Chesterton, I want to make sure I at least get that right, that before you go pulling up fences that have been there for, in this case, 2,000 years, you probably ought to look at why they were there in the first place. I think that's a very simple thing to understand, and that maybe it's there for a reason. Now, again, I'm not a theologian. I didn't go to seminary. I don't claim to be the Bible expert. But it was not lost on me that shortly after this change happened, the pastor that pushed this through, quite frankly, went off the rails. Kind of dismissing everything he had done earlier in life. Basically throwing shade at his father's ministry and to an extent his mother's ministry. I mean, so was it the step that we decided to toss out what was a pretty clear prescription from the Bible, and then it just these other things followed, or were they always mixed together? I don't know. Now, from what I understand, the wheels haven't entirely come off of that church that I formerly was a part of. From what I understand, maybe they dialed it back towards the middle. I don't know, because I'm not a part. I don't really typically interact with people, or a number of people that go there. I don't. I've been out for like 20 years, so I can't answer that, nor would I try to. But again, it has been my observation that when a church starts deviating from something that was well understood for 1,800 plus years, that it's only a short matter of time before they start deviating from other things. I mean, it's a short road to, we're going to have women pastors, to flying the tranny flag out front of your church, or the Black Lives Matter flag out front of your church. Now, I realize now I'm poking some people here, but hear me out. Once you go off script, once you deviate from the course, it doesn't take very long till you're terribly off course. Now, I remember speaking with a pastor years ago, and we were talking about the heresy of Arianism. Okay, it had to do with their understanding of how the I want to make sure I get this right here, folks. It had to do with how God was made up. All right, rather than try and just explain it, I'm going to just read it. Courtesy of Wikipedia, but again, whatever. And of course, this was settled between Nicaea and the Council of Constantinople. So it was a Trinitarian question, right? And when I'm talking about the makeup, I'm talking about who God is, how he functions, and how do we understand the definition of, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? So, that being said, it's, in my mind, it's, they're saying there's a different substance involved here. It's not exactly the same. Okay, and I'm looking at it and I say, could it just be a difference of understanding? Maybe they can't explain it rather than they're actually denying the deity of Christ? And the response was something along the lines of, you're right, it could be a very minor thing. But he said, you were in the Navy. Remember, if your ship gets off course by 1 degree, that means nothing for maybe a mile. But when you get 100 miles out, that's a significant difference. Now figure that in time. Where does that end up? Where does your faith end up going? Fair enough. So again, this kind of goes to the structure, right? They debated these things over 1800 years ago, and they came to an understanding. So when you go and you upend something that's been well understood, and you're using the argument that we've reinterpreted, or we're re-understanding it, or we have new ways of figuring out what those Greek words meant, or the letters, or something in Hebrew, I'm thinking you're straining at gnats here. I'm thinking the guys from 1800 to 2000 years ago were probably a lot more familiar with the language and what they meant and what they lived it out as, that I find it very hard to believe that you're going to come in after the fact and re-understand things. Now, you can get into semantics. What's a title? What does this mean? What does that mean? Okay, fine. I'm not going to argue that. It's pretty clear, right? There's a number of scriptures that talk about the different roles and leadership. And again, I believe it's a heterodox teaching to do, to have women preaching from the pulpit on Sundays. I believe it's heterodox to have women elders or overseers, right? I believe it's heterodox, but I won't go so far as to call it heresy. Because I think people can misunderstand or be misled, or quite frankly, that's not important enough to them that they worry about that distinction. I'm certain that there are people that don't keep the Sabbath on Saturday. They do it on Sunday. And I know there's people that aren't even Seventh-day Adventists that think that is a thing, right? That's fine. I don't think it's wrong. I just don't happen to subscribe to that. So when you jettison something that had been so for 1800 years, and you're using it under the mantra or the ideal that you should always be changing. Well, I brought up the fact that the Orthodox Church, the Oriental Church, and the Catholic Church, for whatever failings or disagreements that I as a Protestant might have with them, they're pretty solid and they haven't deviated from this. It's only the Protestant Church that seems to struggle with this. And when somebody pops off with the idea that we should always be reforming, my question is, what are you reforming? It was real simple when I was a 15-year-old kid to say, oh, this stuff is stupid and we don't need to follow these rules and, this stuff doesn't matter. But now, as I'm significantly older than that, 35 years have gone by, and I look at the thing and I say, yeah, maybe those rules were put there for a reason. Maybe those fences really didn't matter. What dynamics change? Right? And I'm not going to criticize or argue the specific thing here. It's just an idea that you can't just decide, you and a group of scholars, putting the scare quotes up here right now, folks, you can't decide that you know better and you can go ahead and disregard 1,800 plus years of history. And when you make an appeal to authority, well, so-and-so agrees with me, or so-and-so has been super smart or fantastic or did this, that, or the other thing, it doesn't mean they can't be wrong. 1,800 years of history before them, everybody was in agreement on it, but now, this person thought otherwise, so clearly they know better. And look, again, I know there's some Pentecostal and the brethren of the friends, they feel differently about this, and that's okay. There's some of this openness, if you will, but the Protestant church wasn't on board with those things. The standard evangelical Protestant church, which really consequently doesn't even come into play for at least until the early 1900s. And there's some different things at play there, but I'm fairly certain that if you go back to the dawn of Baptists or the Presbyterians or the Lutherans, or even the Methodists, they would have lost their stuff over this, to say nothing over the endorsing and parading of sexual sin or allowing it to be used to identify yourself. But that's where we're at. I mean, look at what's happened to at least one branch, if not two branches of the Presbyterian Church. I mean, pretty much all of Methodism, pretty much all of Methodism is toast at this point. I mean, I wonder what the Wesley brothers think about that. And then there's Lutheranism, which they have their own challenges. They're synods and they do things a little differently. And again, you can't operate one way and then just change it. I mean, to me, this reminds me of the story that my dad told me coming out of Vatican II, right? Well, I was raised that it was always wrong to eat fish on Fridays. Or it was always wrong to eat meat, so I had to have fish on Fridays. And then Vatican II came around and, that just didn't matter anymore. Now, it's kind of odd, isn't it? But this is the world we live in. We're essentially having this happen in our churches. And they're claiming that their interpretation or their understanding of the scriptures changed. In fact, they're kind of intimating that scriptures got it wrong. Or at least our understanding of the scripture. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Is the word God breathed? Is it consistent? Do we know it's accurate? And if so, why all of a sudden are we changing this? It sounds like to me, and I could be getting this wrong, but just follow it. It sounds like to me they're making the church follow the culture. They're saying that Christianity should cave to the culture. That we don't really have anything to offer that's new or different or consistent. And it isn't new, but when you have a mindset where you've been raised in a sewer, metaphorically speaking, and you come to the clean of Christianity, it's new. It's something different. It's something that's supposed to be somewhat universal. Ideally, you should be able to go to any legitimate Protestant church and hear the same kind of sermon or the same things preached. Jesus was raised for your sins and various other parts that go around that, but it should be pretty standard. But then when you toss out things that have been well understood, it's just a matter of time before the denomination tanks or the church itself goes sideways. Now, you could say, well, Stephen, you're blaming women for things. Maybe that's not fair or not right. No. Here's the thing. Most everything that happens that's really bad in these United States, why is it happening? Because the church is silent. For probably the first 100 years of the United States, the church was intimately involved in everything that went on in people's lives and the government. For better or for worse, we didn't have some of this crazy stuff out in the open. I have no doubt that the perversion's always been there, right? The old gods, they've always had their perverts. But it wasn't celebrated. It wasn't allowed to be an identity and claimed to likewise be a Christian. There was supposed to be a clear dividing line. If I am a Christian, I am not that. My old man has been cast off. I am a new creation. But I don't see that we're doing that anymore. I don't see that we're preaching it. And now we're basically making excuses for people that want to hold on to their sin. Now you're thinking, well, Stephen, what do you do about drunkards? What do you do about smokers? What do you do about this? What do you do about... You know what? That's a very valid thing. If you're drinking but not getting drunk, maybe you're a stumbling stone to somebody. Maybe you're not. Probably wouldn't advise doing that around young kids, just saying. But what you do at a private dinner party or in your own home, I don't think that's dishonoring to God. If you're a dude and you're hanging with another dude, or you're a chick and you're doing stuff with another chick, yeah, that's a problem. If you're a dude and you're with multiple partners, yeah, that's a problem. If you're a chick and you're with multiple partners, yeah, that's a problem. But we allow for that to be an identity thing. And now we won't even meet head on the crisis that we have where people don't know who they are. I mean, we have people that don't know that they're a male or a female. And maybe it's harsh to say they're mentally ill, but if it's the truth, we need to have compassion and care and help them through that and be there, not console them and encourage them in that. Now, there could be other things going on there. You know, oftentimes abuse leads to some of this stuff. You don't have to like it. Just acknowledge it's truth. There's truth there. Oftentimes, if you're abused, you act out later on in life in a specific way. I mean, I'm certain that things happened to me in my past that made me who I am now. That's no different. It's just, how does it turn out? How do you see it? When people go and do irreversible surgery and remove healthy body parts because they somehow think it's going to make them feel better, and we're encouraged to go along with that, or we pretend it's okay, are we doing them any favors? I mean, the world's happy about this, right? I mean, look, this is the next minority group that we must protect. It's a good way to make cash, right? What doctor doesn't want to make some money? I mean, not a good doctor, not one that I would know, I would hope, but there's plenty of bad actors out there. They do this kind of stuff. And government just goes along because they don't care. It's one more downtrodden mass that they can keep under their thumb and more easily maintain control over the masses. What do they care? Oh, and by the way, they can't have kids, at least not normally. See, it sounds like a net gain if you want to control the population, both existing and future. But nobody wants to talk about that. Nope. The church is going to turn a blind eye to this. The church is silent on so many other things, but this is something that should be blatantly obvious to everybody. You don't do these things. Now, I'm going to assume that if you go to church, you don't want to hear every week, by the way, the church says, right here in the Bible, God makes it clear that you're only supposed to be with your spouse, which is the opposite sex of you, because there are only two sexes. I don't think you need to do that every week or even every month. But it should be blatantly clear where the church stands on this. But when we say we're open, we're inclusive, we're understanding, that's not what they're hearing. They're hearing it's okay for you to continue to live in your sin because nobody's going to hold you accountable for it. These two things go hand in hand. You elevate women to positions of authority, and you disregard God's creation and try and sell it as a new understanding. Really? Or you equate all sin as being equal. Okay, I mean, that's a good pitch. All sin falls short of the glory of God, yes, but there are different consequences for different sins. Some more eternal or have different effects in the eternal, and some have more immediate effects, none of which are good long term. But we ignore that as well. Now, I don't know, you can use the argument that if you do one thing, the other's going to follow. Or that you can say that by being temperate, lukewarm on this issue, you're going to immediately follow with lady pastors. I don't know that that's fair. Observation has shown me that they often go hand in hand. Observation has often shown me that, quite frankly, it turns a lot of people off. Good Christian people don't want to be around things that, quite frankly, deviate from orthodox, deviate from the expected norm. It's not so much that they're fuddy-duds. It's not so much that they're rejecting it. It's they're questioning, why are we changing something now? I mean, it's one thing if you want to go fire up a new church down the road and say, we believe that all the leadership should be women. Or we believe that men and women are exactly equal and we're going to have co-leaders for everything. That's fine. I get it. I would not participate in a church like that, but I'm sure there'll be hundreds of people that want to go participate in that. And that's fine. And you may teach completely orthodox stuff with the exception of that specific issue. And that may go for years and years and years and years and years. Because that's the way it was created. There's not a change. That's how it started. But I would submit to you that when you look at some of these denominations and they caved to the culture, they shoved the camel's head underneath the side of the tent, and now the camel's all over the inside of the tent and dropping its waste everywhere, making a giant mess of it, to the point where all the, we'll call them normies, have fled the tent. They don't want to be a part of this congregation. They don't want to be a part of this denomination because clearly it's gone off the rails, yet the denomination owns everything. So the people that flee, that they paid for it, that they put their blood, sweat, and tears into it, they have to go somewhere else and start all over again. And they lose everything. Now, I'm not sure I'm enthusiastic about that. I don't think that's a good idea. But that's the world we appear to live in, right? It's like a divorce. And if you should be foolish enough to leave your wife, she's going to get pretty much everything, right? I mean, you shouldn't betray the wife of your youth, right? You should love them always to the end. Now, yeah, I know there's exceptions. I get it. There's at least two reasonable reasons why a marriage gets dissolved. But there's a whole lot of stuff that happens before that ever comes to it. So the same could be said with a church, right? All the bad things that happen largely happen because the church is silent. They largely happen because the church stays out of it. Now, whether it's just pietism or whether it's they're secretly okay with it, I don't know. And all these things happen and the church is silent, and the people that are in the church wonder, when are we going to be led? When are we going to do something about this? And they're told, well, we're apolitical here. We don't really worry about the politics. But it's not politics. It's policy. It's what's right. There's a huge difference there. I know I've talked about this probably 20 or 50 times at this point. I don't want a pastor that's going to tell me who to vote for. But I do want a pastor that makes it clear what's on the ballot. What's being represented. Do you support this? If so, then maybe you should consider this. Do you support this? Okay, well, maybe you should consider this. Or this is what these people think about these things, or this is what this party says about these things. I got to be honest, I'm really uncomfortable with the notion that when I go to a church and I see a whole bunch of Beto signs in the parking lot, I'm wondering what kind of church I'm at. Now, I don't hate the guy. I don't know the guy. Quite frankly, I think the guy was cardboard cutout of a candidate, but ostensibly, if you're a member of the Democrat Party, you're okay with women killing babies. You're okay with perverts doing whatever they do. As a matter of fact, I would imagine at this point in time, the Democrat Party supports permanent surgeries done to minor children that probably have psychological help needed. And they're perfectly okay with that. And not only that, they think we should pay for it. Now, I fully understand the party I belong to, the Republican Party, is far from pure, far from perfect. But I am also very, very certain that nobody in party leadership, including myself, supports any of that nonsense. Thinks any of that's a good idea. Now, some of us might say, well, if an adult wants to go chop parts off, they're an adult. I'm not going to stop them. I shouldn't have to pay for it. I believe it's wrong. And if they should talk to me about it ahead of time, I'll tell them, well, I don't think that's a good idea. And this is why, besides what the Bible tells you that, you shouldn't be doing these things, it's got long-term consequences that you will need to consider. I mean, you can argue it more than one way, but if you're not going to say anything, if you're just going to pretend it's normal, you're not going to speak into the culture, then what are you? Have we become the salt that is no longer salty? Have we become the tepid water? My biggest concern is that when the church starts deviating from simple Orthodox teaching that has been around for 1,800 years, at what point do we just realize that we have negated anything good that we might be able to do? We're doing good things in spite of these bad actions. Now, we're all sinners. Nobody's perfect, myself especially, right? I don't claim to be perfect. I have lots of opinions. I have lots of ideas. I'm fairly well-read, fairly intelligent guy. I can figure things out. I can look at things logically, and I can see that this just doesn't make any sense. You can't go reinterpret a single word in Greek and justify changing 1,800 years of history, unless, of course, you do. And then, quite frankly, force feed it on an entire congregation and not expect somebody to question it. At what point, though, do you, as a member of that congregation, just say, you know what? I can't do this anymore. This is not what I signed up for. This is not in keeping with Orthodox teaching. This is not appropriate. This is not standard biblical Christian teaching. I can't tolerate this anymore. When do I just need to walk away? Or should I fight for my church? But here's the problem. I don't want to have to fight my church. The church is supposed to be on my side. They're supposed to be leading. They're supposed to be putting light out to the society. They're supposed to be the salt. They're supposed to have savor. They're supposed to be attracting people by standing firm on the word of God, and we're barely doing that. And then we redefine what was formerly important issues. Now they're just secondary issues. Don't you worry about that. The Bible's relatively quiet on that specific thing. Those things really don't matter. Well, I'm sorry. At what point do you just say, enough's enough? And I got to admit, I'm at a crossroads. This is very personal to me. I got a lot of time invested. And I don't want to cast aspersions, and I don't want to assume the worst. But when you toss out 1,800 years worth of Orthodox biblical teaching to do something new because you think it's better, because you did an extra study on it, and you and your small band of merry men found a justification of it after you did some word salad, and you throw some Gnostic reading or justification in there as well, just for good measure. I'm sorry. Now, to be frank, the Baptist Church has kind of had to work around for this for decades, right? Hey, we got this really great lady we'd like to come talk to the church, but we're not really supposed to have lady pastors, so we're going to go ahead and have the senior pastor sit up there and introduce them and let them talk under the banner and the authority of the senior pastor. Okay. She spoke on her issue under the authority. He closes, says, wasn't that great? Wasn't that a great share? Wasn't that a great greeting? Whatever you want to call it. And we move on. Perhaps you have a special occasion or a special event or okay, everybody gets it, right? Nobody's saying that women aren't worthy. Nobody's saying that women don't have a ton of things to add. There's just specific roles that were laid out. There's things that women can do that men can never do. No matter what modern science might attempt, we're not genetically able to carry a baby. We're just not. In fact, our body is made differently that where you look at a set of bones, you can tell if they're male or female. It's pretty simple here, right? And again, I'm not a medical specialist, but even I know that. Even I understand that. But we're going to pretend. We're going to fall into the zeitgeist of the moment and start redefining things. So let me ask you, what's gained? I've often asked this in political circles, right? Hey, look, the Republican Party doesn't want to be seen as hostile to homosexuals, so we're going to have an open hand to them. Okay, I get it. We're not hostile. No. We want to be open. We want to be encouraging. We want to bring them on board. We want to get them more involved. Okay. Have you considered the ramifications of doing that? Well, what do you mean? Well, we want more young people, and they're pro-gay and this stuff. Okay, I get it. But now we're talking about politics, right? So honestly, in politics, you have an ideology, but there is not a firm foundation as they're supposed to be with Christianity here. So, you're cutting deals. You're making Machiavellian choices to win races. Let's just be honest. That's what it boils down to. So yeah, I totally get it. Yep. I might find something personally distasteful, but if that's what we need to do to win the election, and quite frankly, I don't hate people that do that. I don't dislike them. In fact, maybe if I spend some time around them, they'll see that Christians don't hate them. Maybe they'll listen to something I have to say later on. Okay, yeah, I can hear that. I get that. But that's politics. Politics is supposed to be the art of the possible, right? We're not talking about politics. We're talking about Orthodox Christianity. And the Bible's quite clear on what it says about a number of things. And we can't just go ahead and redefine them as secondary issues when, quite frankly, all this stuff's been hammered out over 1,800 years ago. And we can't just decide that we know better now because, we reinterpreted this Greek word in this passage here. So it added a little nuance that we might have missed. So we need to reconsider what, has been held firm to for years. Okay. Sounds rather disingenuous. And then when you throw out the notion that, we kind of feel like the church has been held back because we haven't let women do this thing. Really? So we're going to get something special or different because now a woman's doing it? How is that not a Gnostic interpretation of something? I mean, maybe you can argue the semantics there with me, but that's certainly what it sounds like to me. And if not, it's certainly well on that slippery slope. And I mean, all of this really keys off of that logical fallacy, right? The slippery slope. When you're okay with one thing, when you deviate in one place, it's only a matter of time before you start deviating in other things. When you just become okay with other things, right? Your heart gets hardened. Oh, wait, the Bible does tell us about that. So while it might be a logical fallacy, because just because A doesn't necessarily mean B, but when we see the hearts of men, we know that if you can get away with A, you're going to probably try B as well. And while we're at it, we'll just throw in C for good measure. And we've seen this play out in multiple denominations over the last 100 years. And we think somehow we're going to be special. We're going to miss out on this because our church is independent and our church is this or our church is that. I'm not buying it. I can't help but think if we could rewind in time to March of 2020, if we would have had leadership in Dallas. Now, I know we had one pastor in Dallas. I think he was over at Prestonwood. But if we would have had leadership that coordinated their things together, and they sat down, some of the leaders of the larger churches, and they said, hey, you know what? Historically, the church never shut down during the plagues. Historically, the church has always been there in a time of need for people. Historically, the church has always had people willing to sacrifice to take care of others. Historically, the church took care of the people that were thrown away and forbidden. Historically, the church took away the babies that were left to die out in the fields when the mothers tossed them away. Yes, we have concerns about this, pandemic, but we serve a mighty God. And if we're doing the work of God, if we're supporting our communities, if we're there for those people, yeah, you know what? Some people might get sick. Some people might die. There's obviously going to be consequences. But we serve a mighty God. And we trust and believe that he's going to get us through this. And we're going to stay open. And not only are we going to stay open, we're going to offer certain things to care for people, to look out for people, to make sure those people that are going to lose their jobs, potentially lose their house, that they're not going to be alone. You know, we could have made that chance difference back then. And we could have took it on head on. We could have followed the example of John MacArthur and said, yeah, okay, Los Angeles County, okay, state of California, I've heard you, but I don't serve you. I serve the Almighty. And he says we're supposed to worship. We're supposed to gather and worship. That would have spurred on many, many people. You want to talk about getting people excited, getting people to buy in. That's how you do it. You lead by example. You be forthright. You stand up and do the right thing. Now, maybe you have to tweak the words, or maybe you got to, play a little game to, not get the jackboot of government thrown on your neck. I get it. But you stand firm in your resolve and you do the right thing, and you don't run and hide. You don't cower. You serve the Almighty God, and he tells us we're supposed to do something. We darn well ought to do it. What kind of example are we setting for the world around us when we cowered for months at home, afraid that somebody might get sick? Now look, I know I kind of overstated this a little bit a week or so ago, and I did my mea culpa on that, but honestly, we get the flu every year. We get bad sicknesses that roll through every couple of years. There was no need for what went on. Now again, maybe the first 2 weeks, maybe the first month, nobody was really sure what was going on. Everybody was kind of, under the sway of what's really going on here. I get it. Fine. We'll call it a free pass. But where were those churches? Where were those pastors? Why didn't they take the lead? And it's those same churches, those same pastors that are now knuckling under, right? Oh, well, you shouldn't be doing this stuff. We have to bend to culture. We're not progressive enough. We're not caring enough. No. If we would have been doing our job, the world would have seen us. They would have took note. There would have been plenty of salt and light. Not this candy stuff that we're doing now. Sunshine and lollipops aren't going to convince people. I just feel like we missed a giant opportunity, and we have yet to deal with it. We have yet to admit our miss. We have yet to acknowledge that we failed. And the way we think we're going to fix things is to adopt the next progressive ideal that comes down the road because, we're going to just follow the culture. I mean, essentially that's what we did. We swore off our allegiance to God and bowed to government when we did what the culture wanted, which was to close down. I know I've referenced this before. You got to serve somebody, or you're going to serve somebody. I really think the church universal, really, with a handful of exceptions, and I know locally, Prestonwood and Cottonwood Creek, they opened up pretty quick. And their pastors were pretty firm that, yeah, we're going to do this. We're supposed to be here. But what I don't understand is why 98% of those churches in Collin County, Dallas County, Tarrant County, Denton County didn't open up and say, nope, we're here. We're here for our congregation. We're here for our people, and we're going to lead by example. We're going to show how it can be done. I just don't understand it. And now those same people come back and say, well, we've misunderstood things for 1,800 years. We're going to do something different. I don't have faith that they're doing the right thing. I don't have faith that they got their head in the right place. They caved to government once, and now they're caving to man's cultural demands. That's not good Christian leadership, in my humble opinion. And that's not something that excites me, and that's not something that I want to follow or support. But the question is, what do I do? What's the right thing here? It is personal. And if you're listening to me, I'm imagining that you've run across similar things, and you've got to be thinking the same things. What do we do? How do we go forward? Do we just continue to accept what our betters determine as the new understanding of things? Or do we say, no, that's not right. We missed it. This is what we should have done then, and we know what we ought to be doing now, and that's not going to play word games and semantics to justify doing the latest thing that culture tells us we should be doing. But that's the world we live in right now. When's it going to stop? When a church ceases to be salt and ceases to be light, is it even still a church? It's no coincidence there's churches that have closed all over the area. Some of them will be replaced by mosques. Some of them will get a new church in there, maybe. But if they're just the cultural effluent nonsense that they would have gotten before, it won't be long lasting. You can't very well have a firm foundation if you question the very foundation that you've built upon. It's fine to question it as a starting point, but once you accept it, you need to accept it and go forth. You don't go back and start second guessing things because culture told you otherwise. You don't change the word of God because government told you otherwise. That's where we're at. When you wonder how we got where we're at today, when you wonder why the United States, why Texas, why Collin County, why McKinney is the way it is, aside from looking in the mirror, go visit your local church. Just ask, what are you doing? What are you doing to hold the line here? I'd be curious as to what they tell you. With that, this has been According to Callus. This has been a throwback to Theology Thursday. And yes, it's been a bit of a rant and event, but boy, if I can't get it off my chest here, where am I going to do it? But relax, I will see you on the other side.
Wanted. Young men to rebuild Western civilization. Must be unafraid of pain, blisters, intellectual rigor, and a lifetime of long shifts with swords and shovels, digging ditches, repelling invaders, and reading stacks of books taller than their fathers. Must be impervious to manipulative women of all sorts, giggling virgins, cyber skanks, and even full cauldrons of Karens or hand-wringing clergy, but always seeking to hear and heed the words of Lady Wisdom. Immune to the leadership of hypocrites and LARPing online masculinitods, unaffected by abusive authorities, petty professors, and all brokers of official respectability. Willing to hoist the Jolly Roger and Johnny Cash's favorite finger whenever faced with idolatry. Long-suffering joy and determination required. Must be willing to dwell among the tombs and graves of the long dead, seeking truths that cannot die. Exhaustion guaranteed. Conflict guaranteed. Mortality guaranteed. New St. Andrews College. Liberal arts for the undaunted.